Before you could stream, rent, download, or buy movies to view at your own convenience, people in Ontario relied on movie lover and TVO host Elwy Yost for much of what they got to see or learn about cinema. He presented classics, varied genres, art house flicks, and behind-the-scenes interviews. It may sound familiar now, but TVO's Saturday night film programming, and particularly Elwy Yost's infectious enthusiasm, well, they were one of a kind. His life and the passion that anchored more than a quarter-century of programs on this network is now the subject of a documentary. It's called Magic Shadows, Elwy Yost, A Life in Movies. It has its world premiere, appropriately enough, this Saturday night, 8 p.m., and it brings to our airwaves tonight Elwy's two sons, filmmaker Graham Yost in Los Angeles, California, and writer Christopher Yost in Vancouver, British Columbia. And we couldn't do this without Risa Shuman, who is executive producer of Saturday Night at the Movies. She's joining us from the Bloor West Village area of the provincial capital, and it is so good to see you three again. You know, Risa, I want to start with you, and I just don't want to make any assumptions because we have a lot of people watching this program who are new Canadians or who are young Canadians who never saw Saturday Night at the Movies. So let's start from scratch. Who was Elwy? What made him distinct?
Okay, Elwy Yost was probably the world's greatest film buff. He lived and breathed movies. And in 1974, a package of documentaries came in to the building from a distributor, and along with it came 3 Ingmar Bergman films. And Elwy, who had hosted a show on the CBC in the 60s called Passport to Adventure, so he was well known for his love of movies, was asked in his corporate world where he was working at TVO, how do we put feature films, especially these 3 Ingmar Bergman movies, on an educational network? Now, you have to know, we were only about 4 years old, TVO.
So we're going back to the middle 1970s right now.
Exactly. And it wasn't even TVO. It was Channel 19. We had one station. And they came to Elwy and said, how do we do it? And he said, well, the films are quite spiritual in context. Ingmar Bergman is known for that. So why don't we take these 3 films, go to 3 religious congregations, show the film, and film their reaction and their discussion. And that's how it all started. It was take a film and put it into a context.
Fabulous. Let's show the man at work, shall we? Here's from the documentary Magic Shadows. If you would, Sheldon, please.
That was the 1925 version of The Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney. Make you shudder? I hope so. The Phantom was remade twice since then, once in 1943 with Claude Rains in the role. That's the one I first saw as a kid growing up. And again in 1962 with Herbert Lom, but I still think the first version will always stand out as the most memorable.
Graham, the camera just loves him, and he loves the camera, you can tell. Why?
He was just such, Chris and I both know, he was such a warm human being in real life, and that really translated onto the camera and onto the screen. And that doesn't happen with everyone. You know, you meet people who are wonderful people and you get along with them and they get in front of a camera and there's nothing there, but Dad just had that magic. And, you know, when he was talking about something, as Risa said, you know, he loved movies. I mean, Chris and I grew up just talking about movies from from when we were little toddlers, and so that passion, I think, came across.
Chris, there is I don't know if there's a myth or there's certainly something in the air that suggests that your father never saw a movie that he didn't like, that he loved everything. Is that true?
Yeah, that's a lovely myth, and it's not true at all. How you could tell that my father hated a film, at the end of the film, he would just be in a really, really bad mood. He wouldn't berate any aspect of the film, the acting or anything. He would just be in a really foul mood. After The Exorcist 2, I think he was in a bad mood for about 3 days. And Jaws 2, the same.
He didn't like those sequels,
so,
eh?
Yeah, he did. If it was bad, it deserved to be hated. And he couldn't find something good in it. It would be yeah, he'd just be really bummed out for quite a while.
Well, let's go to the other side of the spectrum then, Graham. What were obviously the man saw tens of thousands of movies in his life. Did he have a handful that were his favorites?
He did. He had sort of the sentimental handful, like King Kong and Thief of Baghdad. But then he also, you know, his favorite was Citizen Kane, the Treasure of the Sierra Madre. But like right up into present times. I mean, well, not our present now, but I mean, Chris took them to see Borat, and my dad thought that was one of the funniest movies he'd ever seen. He loved good comedies. He was not a big fan of musicals. And, you know, one of the family stories was first date with mom takes her to see a musical, and they come outside, and he said, "What did you think?" And she said, "No, I don't really like musicals that much." "Well, what do you like?" And she said, "You know, things like Treasure of the Sierra Madre." And that was it. You know, then they were married for 60 years because of that.
Amazing. Risa, I want to pick up on the Citizen Kane comment. Did he ever get a chance to meet Orson Welles, whom I know he held in extremely high regard?
Well, the boys may disagree with me on this, but I am happy that he never met Orson Welles. Orson Welles, at the time that we would have interviewed him, was a bit of a laughingstock. He was a bit of a buffoon. He was on Johnny Carson, your favorite show, Steve, all the time, you know, with magic tricks and things. And he really wasn't the Orson Welles of Citizen Kane. In one of the first years, they did get an offer. Now, we never paid anyone, but Orson Welles demanded $5,000. And I know that Elwy was going to cash in a life insurance policy just to get it. But in the end, it didn't work out. And I think for Elwy, it was the best. You know, when you talk about him not seeing a movie he didn't like, I mean, he took it all very personally. And it was like an offense to him that, why was this film not so good? It should have been better. It had blah, blah, blah. And so that was part of our mission, was to point out that nobody goes in to make a bad movie. People go in with all the best intentions. So what happens? Why does a film come out okay? And why does a film not work? And those were some of the motivations and answers we tried to get for the 25 years that he was there and subsequent years that followed.
Let me follow up with Chris on whether you think, Chris, it actually in the end proved to be a good thing that he never met his hero, Orson Welles.
I honestly can't answer that. I know that he probably wanted to, and I'm sure that if he had an opportunity to interview Orson, he could have steered the interview in a way that would have worked out at least fairly well. It's hard to say.
Graham, what do you say?
I think Chris is right on that. You know, there was one of the great stories of lore of Saturday Night at the Movies was his interview with Henry Fonda that just didn't go well at first. Until my dad started talking about the paintings he saw around I think that's in the documentary, around Henry's house, right? And then he opened up, but it might have been a bad interview. But he was pretty good at getting people to open up because he had done his homework. And he clearly wasn't there to criticize or nitpick or draw attention to any, you know, of their personal lives. He was just there to talk about the movies, and a lot of these people love talking about the movies. So he might have gotten something out of Orson, but you know, you don't know. Reese is right. At that point in his career, he wasn't the Orson Welles that he was back in Citizen Kane and Ambersons and Touch of Evil and all of that.
Right. Risa, he didn't interview Orson Welles, but he did interview somebody else from Citizen Kane. How did that go?
He did. Oh, my goodness. Well, we were interviewing Patricia Medina. We had arranged an interview with her. Now, at the time, she was actually Mrs. Joseph Cotton. Now, Joseph Cotton was one of the only living people left from Citizen Kane and Ambersons. So I was in the lobby to await the arrival. And I see two figures in this big caddy drive up. And sure enough, out comes Patricia Medina, and out comes this elegant, beautiful posture, this lovely man, Joseph Cotten. Now, you have to know that Joseph Cotten at this point in his life had not only a stroke and he learned to speak again, but he then got throat cancer and he couldn't speak. He could only whisper. Anyway, he came out, he was beautifully dressed, and I got very emotional. And I said, oh my God, my host is going to be apoplectic. Anyway, we got in the elevator. I took him up. I had this marvelous moment of terrific timing. Elwy came out of the room, and I said, Elwy, may I introduce you to Mr. Joseph Cotten? And Elwy immediately burst into tears. Now, the Yost are criers. There he is. That's after the interview. And what happened was we did the interview. He sat on the balcony of the hotel, and he just did a crossword puzzle. But afterwards, after the interview, Elwy came into the other room and with Patricia Medina, and all of a sudden it just really hit him. Oh my God, I'm standing here with Joseph Cotten, who was in my all-time favorite movie. And he burst into tears again. And then we were all crying. And then Joseph Cotten reached into his pocket, pulled out a hanky. He said, here, dear boy, wipe those tears. I mean, he didn't know what to. Here we are, this group of Canadian nut bars standing there crying our eyes out, and he doesn't know what's going on.
Graham, I do have to follow up with you on that, because I well remember Elwy's farewell retirement party here at TVO, and you were there as well, and he burst out into tears on that occasion as well, and it was very unusual for a man of his generation to be that outwardly emotional and have no embarrassment at all about it. What do you think made him that way?
I don't know, but it has cursed me to this day, because I also will just lose it at the drop of a hat. But it's funny, my memory of that final, that sort of swan song 25th anniversary party was that he really held it together pretty well. He did get emotional at times, but there were those times when he could just sort of pull it together and be very clear-eyed and not fall apart. But listen, we're always been a weepy family, and it's taken me 62 years to realize, if that's going to make me cry, maybe I'm not going to talk about that right now. So that's why there might be certain things, Steve, that I'm not going to talk about today. So there you go.
I get you. Okay. Risa, take us back. I really want to go back to 50 plus years ago, because I think if Elwy wasn't the guy who opened the door at TVO, it wasn't far after the doors got open that he started here. How did he end up starting at TVO in the first place?
Okay, so TVO is the merger between the ETV section of the Ministry of Education and a television service called META, which was, I think, Metropolitan Educational TV Association or something. Bill Davis, who was then the Minister of Education, said, why are we funding both of these? We should put them together. So that's how the merger started. And in 1970, in September, they went on air for the very first time as Channel 19. I mean, you even had to have a UHF television in order to watch it, because we were on the other dial. And it was a 6-8 channel universe. But
he was here, Risa. He was here before Saturday Night at the Movies.
Yes, he was on staff because he had been the head of META. So they brought him over, and he was in corporate, and he decided to they wanted to start something called the regional councils. So they would get people from all over Ontario, not necessarily, nobody even could watch us, but they wanted to go to various communities to find out what people wanted, what they needed. So that's how it all started. And Elwy, I said, was up in corporate, and these movies came in and they said what to do. And from that point, he left corporate. He came down to the 4th floor, which was the programming floor. I left the 5th floor down to the 4th floor, and that's how it started.
And there we go.
Very simple.
Chris, I'm going to ask you to pick up the story at this point, because Elwy not only introduced the movies and sort of tried to give some context as to what they were about in his own inimitable fashion, but of course the conversations that took place between the movies, where he'd interview not necessarily the biggest star in the picture, although he did that too, but often sometimes, you know, the cinematographer or the costume designer or somebody who would be a little less famous, but who could give you the great stories behind all that. What, in your view, was distinctive about the way that he interviewed those people?
I think part of it was the fact that he had an encyclopedic memory. And if we were watching a film together as a family, he'd look at the bartender who was not even in the scene, just back there pouring a drink for someone. And he'd list off the 6 films that he had been in before and playing different roles and parts. So he had this kaleidoscope in his mind of how all the different actors fit together. And then when he talked to someone who wrote the screenplay or the score, it would all sort of flow together. And I think his not just his deep knowledge of film, but his absolute, it's a library in his mind. I think that helped a lot. And he could ad lib and talk about almost anything with any person that had to do with the movie.
Well, Graham, you tell a great story in the documentary about the fact that he would see a movie and then he would tell you about it after the fact, but he actually would embellish on what he saw, and that actually helped you when you did Speed. Could you talk about that?
Right. Chris and I called it redirecting, that Dad would redirect a movie. And the classic was a Tom Mixer. It was an old Western, and he remembered Tom had been betrayed by bad guys, and he finally makes it back to his horse, and he picks up a canteen and lips it to his lips, and sand pours out. And he finally saw the movie again, and it was just that it was empty. They hadn't put sand in it, but putting sand in it is a better thing. It's a crueler beat. So for me, he had told me about a Kurosawa script about a train that couldn't slow down or it would blow up. And that ended up becoming the movie Runaway Train. And the reality is there's no bomb on the train. They just can't get to the brakes. They're going through the frozen tundra of Alaska. And I saw the movie and I came out and I thought, you know, Dad's version is better. It'd be better with a bomb. And my addition was to say it'd be better if it was a bus. And that's how Speed started. Was just him having a different take on a story he had heard. He hadn't seen the movie. He just heard about it, and he just made it better.
Chris, for a guy who spent so much of his life around movies, do you think he regretted the fact that he never actually became a director, became a producer, made that his full-time avocation?
I'm sure that he did regret that, and I can remember when he was in his 60s, him saying, "I still don't really know what I want to do for a living." So he would have been happy if he had been able to get into the director's chair. But I think life sort of steered him in a direction where he ended up doing the best thing that he could have done for his personality, I think.
Risa, you wanted to add?
Absolutely. I wanted to add that one time I had to, oh my goodness, go through hoops to try to convince Elwy that a movie that he was convinced was in color was actually in black and white. And it took me days. And finally, I had to physically get a copy of the film and show it to him to prove to him because he described it and the color was so vivid and fabulous. So like Graham says, he always redirected it, and his redirects were much more interesting than the film itself. The other thing that I would like to just point out is that when we talk about how his interview tactics, he could get away with things that nobody would get away with.
Like what, for instance?
Well, for example, some of the women that we interviewed were of an age, and they were very, they had spent a little bit of money on their face. So they were very concerned about how they would look. And I remember, for example, again, going back to one of Elwy's favorite films, he was so excited when he got to meet Fay Wray. And I had bought him a King Kong tie, and he wore this tie, and she was 87, and she was a little pistol. Oh my God, because she had been in silent films. She knew how to use her face, and she flirted, and she this and that. And then she sits down with Elwy, and Elwy looks at her with a big smile on his face, and he says, you know, I saw King Kong when I was 8 years old. And the smile would go from, and they'd go into this frozen smile, like, and he would see, he said one time to Jane Wyatt, again, one of his all-time favorites, Lost Horizon, he said something, and she turned to me and she said, the man is insane. You know, you work for a crazy man, because he was going on about how he was 12 and this and that. And again, she's thinking, I'm still that 20-year-old from the movie. And Elwy kind of, but he got away with it, which was wonderful.
I want to ask Chris about, you know, after he retired in, I guess it was 1999, what did he do with his life at that point? You know, there's this weird thing that once you're no longer on TV, somehow you don't exist anymore for so many people who only know you by being on TV. What did he do with his life after he left TVO?
For a while, he had a show that was similar to Saturday Night at the Movies here on a local station. And then when that finally wound down, he became immersed in the movies from the 30s. And he'd have a big catalog, a thick catalog of, in those days, VHS tapes. And his favorite thing would be to go through it and pick out his favorite choices and then order them and wait like a little kid for Christmas until the big box arrived. Then he'd just spend day upon day going through all these beautiful old silent films and early 30s movies, and mostly movies from the 30s from his youth.
Graham, in your travels in Hollywood, did you ever run into people who said, oh, yeah, he interviewed me 20 years ago for that show he does in Ontario?
Luckily enough, when we were doing a show called Justified in Culver City, Mel Brooks had an office upstairs, and we got to know him pretty well. He was a fan of Justified, which was very cool. But when he heard my name, he said, I remember your dad. Yeah, he was a great interviewer. That was a lot of fun. So that was pretty cool. But you know, listen, you run into any Canadians in Hollywood and they say, are you the son of? And absolutely. And just so happy that I am. And, you know, there is the Tarantino story, which was, we were at the premiere of Speed, and Tarantino was sitting behind us, and he'd just done Reservoir Dogs. And I said to my wife, that's Quentin Tarantino. And then after a few minutes, his hand came over and he touched Dad on the shoulder and he said, are you Elwy Yost? And my dad said, yes. And he said, I've seen every episode of The Movie Makers, which was the packaging of all the interviews. And he just went on and on about how much that meant to him. And then, you know, Dad said, well, what are you working on now? And he said, oh, I got a movie coming out next year called Pulp Fiction. And my dad, oh, that sounds great.
How did that movie do anyway? Yeah, I think it did pretty well.
Okay.
I got about a minute left here, and I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative to go back about 29 years to my first ever appearance on this channel. And here's how I got introduced to the viewing public in the province of Ontario. Sheldon, if you would.
And a new face here in TV Ontario, but certainly no stranger to television viewers in Ontario, and in fact to viewers across Canada, who know him for his energetic and informative role on CBC and CBC News World. I'm delighted, completely delighted to welcome Steve Paikin to his first appearance on TVO. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
It's been worth waiting for.
We wish you many, many happy decades ahead.
I can't tell you guys how meaningful it was to me for Elwy Yost to put his hand on my arm and say, welcome to this place. And I'll never forget that moment, and I'm getting verklempt now just thinking about it. So anyway, that was beautiful. I want to remind everybody, Magic Shadows, Elwy Yost, A Life in Movies airs Saturday night, tomorrow, 8 p.m. It's available on our website, tvo.org, as well, for streaming as you like. And it's been so great to have Graham Yost, Chris Yost, and Risa Shuman with us on the agenda tonight. Take good care, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
See you at the movies.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.